What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the CrazyFaceUno Podcast, where everyone has a story and everyone's story matters. What's your story? In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we want to let you know that we will be donating 100% of our sales and donations at crazyfaceuno.com, that's crazyfaceuno.com, to the World Central Kitchen, founded by Chef Jose Andres. If you would like to help out with that donation, with our support to this organization, the World Central Kitchen, please check out crazyfaceuno.com today. Together is how we defeat this invisible enemy. With that said, I'm your host, Shane McNeely, and boy, are you in for a treat today. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our guest today. Please welcome Janie Lunn. Welcome, Janie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I stumbled through that intro roughly, but hey, we're here. We made it.
We're here.
Just to bring that intro back in. Sorry, Janie, I already introduced you, but World Central Kitchen. If you're not familiar with them, please check them out. The chef Jose Andres, he's a very well-known chef around the world, and he is doing some amazing things. He's on the front lines delivering masks, delivering food, delivering whatever it is that's needed right now. He's a really great guy. So if you're listening, go check him out. Go check out what the World Central Kitchen is doing. You can find them on Twitter, Instagram, all those fun things. And then obviously their website. So check them out. I wholeheartedly endorse them and support them. Cool. Now that I've got that out of the way, Janie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw last week, it wasn't too long ago, a few days ago, that you were on your way back to the United States, being
yes
relieved of your duties for a little while at least. And
yep.
So welcome back. I know that was quite the process.
Oh, yeah.
Janie, you...
Definitely been a whirlwind.
Yeah. You have been a volunteer for the Peace Corp in Uganda, and
yes.
That's about all that I know as of right now.
All right.
So I'm going to hand it over to you. Do you mind just kind of filling us in on, how long you've been in the Peace Corps, how long you've been volunteering, kind of what this process has been, and then, I'll jump in there as we go, but maybe just kind of introduce yourself and what you've been up to recently.
Sure. So I am 26, and I started getting involved with a nonprofit called Invisible Children that I know you know when I was 12 years old. So
Whoop,
for
whoop.
a long time, been involved with them for a long time, and I had planned on trying to work with them after I graduated college.
Yeah.
And then they had to shut down their U.S. headquarters 5 months before I graduated from college. So poor timing. It was a bit of a bummer. But
just for everybody listening, they do have a U.S. headquarters. It's just not in San Diego anymore. They are still operational. Things are still going. But it just looks different than when you and I were there.
Yeah, and so just at that exact timing that they were shutting down the San Diego headquarters, like their future of the organization was really uncertain, and it was just not going to work out at the time. And since then, even though they do still have operations running, I kind of branched out, and within the Invisible Children family, I had been close Facebook friends, but hadn't actually met Jamie Ward, who was a fellow Invisible Children supporter.
Yeah.
And she created her own nonprofit organization with one of the Ugandan roadies from Invisible Children, Collins.
Yeah.
And so they started their own organization called Faraway Friends.
Yes.
And Faraway Friends aims to basically to eradicate poverty through education and empowering the youth, and showing them that their lives can be whatever they want them to be.
Yeah.
And they do a trip every summer to Uganda to visit the school that they've built there, Global Leaders Primary. Mm-hmm. And I had wanted to go for a long time, but it was, of course, costly to go.
Yeah.
And so the summer of 2018, I just decided that I was going to fundraise, and if I could manage to get the money together, I was going to go on this trip, and I did. And I went with an incredible group from faraway friends, and we spent 3 weeks there, and it was absolutely incredible. I had wanted to go there since I was 12, and it was like a dream come true, and it was such an incredible experience. And then when I got back, I started looking into the Peace Corps and seeing if they had a post in Uganda and what kind of positions they had there. And
like a true ICer. I feel like if there's any IC people listening, I'm sure that we've all gone through that similar process. I know I started the application process to go into the Peace Corps at one point in time. I was like, what am I doing with my life? You know? Yeah. And I was like,
I know that all too well.
Yeah, totally. Also, I want to just jump in there and say Collins. Yes. I miss her. I love her. She's amazing.
Oh, she's a gem. Yes.
And one of these days, I'm going to have her on this show. So
yes, you should. I'm sure she would love it.
Yeah, I know she would. I have no doubt we'll be able to figure it out eventually, one of these days, but we haven't invited her yet. So Collins, if you're listening, you're coming on the show one of these days. Just let me know.
We'll get her on
here. We'll get her. Yeah, for sure. So it was shortly after that. So you went with Faraway Friends, and then you came back, and that's when you started that process of pursuing the Peace Corps.
Yeah, so, I had always heard of the Peace Corps and kind of thought it was like this hippie movement from the 60s, 70s, I didn't really think of it as being something that, like, people still really do all that often, if that makes sense. I had friends who had applied for it, but, and I think I had a few friends through Invisible Children that were currently serving, but, it never really was one of my, like, I'm going to join the Peace Corps someday. And so it was very foreign to me to be like looking into it and everything, but it just felt right. It felt like I had an avenue to do something. And, I had been to Uganda now, and I was like, I kind of feel like I know what I'd be getting into a little bit. And so I applied to be a community health educator because I am not like a nurse in any way. I'm not a med student, nothing like that. But when I had gone to Uganda with Faraway Friends, we visited a health center that was the primary place for people in that village to go for any sort of health services. Yeah. And it was just empty. It was 5 or 6 rooms maybe. And there was one room that had the medicine, but I could see all the medicine that was available with my own eyes. There were no hidden drawers or pantries with with extra supplies. It was just what was there. And they had 2 rooms that I very vividly remember. One had a kind of cot on it for women to give birth, and a smaller table next to it to clean off the newborn babies. And then the next room was just a big empty room with a single mattress on the floor that was the recovery room for new mothers. And it was just heartbreaking. And we ended up, I think somebody heard the story and donated money while we were still there for us to get them like 5 or 6 new mattresses. Cool. So we got to give those to the health center while we were there, which was really cool. But when I was looking through the positions available in Uganda through Peace Corps, health was really just what stuck out to me, because I was like, I don't even necessarily need to be a medical professional in order to help with whatever skill set I can bring. Yeah. Even if it's just helping them find funding for materials, even if it's working with communications to just like get them some better access to such basic things. So that was how I chose that role. And it was definitely a long process, the application process, and then going through the interview process. And even once you're accepted, you have to get legally and medically cleared, which, depending on your health status, can take a very long time.
Janie, if you don't mind me jumping in here, do you mind kind of diving in? And I'm somewhat familiar. Like I said, I had kind of started that process, and I had done a little research about that. So I know it's a very tedious, very, very detailed process. I mean, the initial application process is like extensive, which makes sense because it's almost a filtering process, filtering out people that aren't necessarily serious about what they're getting themselves into.
Sure.
In some capacity, right? But could you just kind of walk us through maybe, an overview of what that process looked like for you?
Yeah. So the application, I can't remember if it was the very beginning or very end of October that it was due, but it was sometime in October. The application was due. And once I had that submitted, I think I got my request for an interview around November.
Okay.
And then I think it was within about 2 weeks or so of having the interview, which was just like on Skype kind of video call that they're clearly in like a call center kind of room doing interviews with tons of people all at the same time.
Intimidating.
Yeah, so it was like a lot going on. And you want to make sure that you stand out and are making yourself seem like a good candidate, but it's kind of distracting and it's just like, it's a lot going on. They did the best they could, but they have a lot of candidates to get through. And then about 2 weeks after my interview was when I got my invitation to serve.
Okay.
So I was officially accepted, and then the legal process was fairly straightforward. I had to go and get like official fingerprints taken and send them in, and they had to know about any scars and tattoos and things to identify you and all of that kind of stuff.
Terrifying.
But there weren't really there weren't any really like tests or anything like that for the legal process. It was just kind of tedious like paperwork that you had to get done. And then they did the background checks and everything on their end. But the medical process is what trips a lot of people up. So you have to go to your primary care doctor and get full physical and whatever that entails for your medical history and any updates on your medical history, and then you have to go to the dentist and get like a full dental workup. And if you have any cavities, they all have to get filled before you can serve, and just all kinds of stuff. And if you have any specific like past injury, I don't know anyone who had this specific one, but let's say you tore your ACL in the past or something, more than likely they would send you to a specialist for whatever that prior injury was, even if it was several years ago, and have them do a checkup on that as well to make sure that you're clear. Yeah. So
now
I actually
with the Peace Corp, do they, you're going through all of this, is that all kind of on you, or is there like a budget for that, or is that kind of just that expenses on you?
So I don't know if they have a budget for it. I do know that you can apply to be reimbursed. I don't know I can't remember if it's for everything that you had to have done, or if it's like for a percentage or for only certain aspects of it. But they do give you reimbursement for at least some of the medical expenses. But for me, I was cleared. I was in the clear medically until like they got my prescription list, and I've had diagnosed anxiety since I was 18. And so I had a standing prescription for Xanax just to take like as needed for an anxiety attack or anything like that. And they saw that I had that on my prescription list after I had been cleared with all my current health situations, and they almost didn't clear me, and I had to go back to my doctor and have them take it off of my current prescription list, have my doctor write a note saying that I no longer needed it. I had to sign something saying that I would not bring any benzodiazepines into country, and I would not obtain any once I was there.
Wow.
So it was like very serious. They were not messing around with making sure I couldn't bring Xanax. And it was frustrating because I understand that it can be an addictive thing, and people do use it recreationally and everything. But I was like, if anything, the fact that I have a prescription for it should make it okay for me to bring it. But I mean, it ended up kind of being a blessing in disguise, because I ended up kind of having to manage my anxiety on, just on a more personal defense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, but still frustrating during the process. But yeah, I finally got my medical clearance in January, and then I left in May. So
January, May. So you were there like 4 months.
So I got my medical clearance in January and then left for Uganda
in May. And
yeah.
then May, so then, okay, got it.
Yeah.
May 2019.
19.
Okay, so you...
Yeah, so I was there just under a year.
Okay, that's what I was...
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Wow. Yeah. Man... Yeah, that process sounds pretty rigorous, which it makes sense. I mean, what's the length of your contract? About 2 years?
27 months, yeah.
27
3 months of training and then 2 years of service.
Cool. What was your training like? What was that experience like? And especially, maybe we can dig into it, but I guess my like comparison would be like, how are you comparing the training that you got at Peace Corp with Invisible Children?
Oh, interesting. Well, the training was definitely also extensive and grueling. Mm-hmm. We were in training all day, every day from 8 to 5. Yeah. And one funny thing about Uganda, I don't know if this is true for other Peace Corps posts, but in Uganda, so they were colonized by the British, and so a lot of things over there are, seem what I would associate with British. Like they call trash rubbish, and they call the trunk of a car the boot, and things like that. And
that's funny. I didn't know that.
They love tea time. They love to have tea time. So we would have 2 tea breaks a day, every day during training, and sometimes it was nice, but sometimes we were like, can we just skip the tea and like get out of our sessions earlier and like have more time, like downtime,
Yeah.
But yeah, so training, I don't really know how to compare it to Invisible Children because it was very different. Like it had a lot of aspects to it. Was
it in country or was it in the States?
Yeah, it was in country.
Okay.
So it was in Mukono in Uganda, which is, depending on traffic, about an hour or 2 from Kampala, the capital.
Okay. North?
It's in the central region.
Central, okay.
Yeah.
But north of Kampala?
Northeast, I guess. I would say more.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say more east than north, but
cool.
But pretty close to Kampala, so it's still in that central region. And we had training in all different aspects. We had our sector-specific training, so my cohort, which is the group that I came from America with, mm-hmm. Half of us were health volunteers and half of us were agribusiness volunteers. So we would often split up into health and ag and get our training specific to those 2 subjects.
Yeah.
And for that aspect of it, we had mostly current volunteers who had been in our sector for about a year in country, and they would train us on different projects that they did, and there's like the health framework of the certain objectives kind of that you're supposed to meet with whatever projects you do.
Yeah.
So we got the kind of general health framework overview, and we got specific lessons on specific activities that you can do, groups you can form, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And then we also had to get a lot of cultural training. We had to get familiar with, some of the local terminology. Like,
sure.
There's I think over 50 languages spoken in Uganda.
Okay.
So we couldn't get like specific language training then.
Yeah.
But just general English is the official language of Uganda. So most people do speak it. So we just had to learn certain phrases that they would say. Like there was one, we had a whole session one time on jargon, and they would show us a phrase and ask us what we thought it meant. And there was one particular one that was sleeping around. And so we all, he put it up on the screen, and we all just started laughing. So we're like, well, everyone knows what sleeping around means,
Yeah.
And he was like, well, what do you think it means? And so we told him, we're like, it means having sex with multiple people, like just kind of, sleeping with people around.
Yeah.
And they all like covered their mouths and were like, no, that's not what it means here. And so apparently in Uganda, sleeping around is just like if you're sleeping over or sleeping nearby. So like if someone's at your house and you don't know if they're staying, you'll be like, oh, are you sleeping around tonight? And like that's just how they say it. So we had to get cultural training on just like little nuances like that.
I love that stuff.
There were bigger things like we had to learn to hand wash our laundry.
Sure.
We had to learn how to bucket bathe.
Sure.
Things like that.
Are you an expert at hand washing your laundry now?
I actually am not. I was pretty lazy about it.
Sure.
And for a lot of people, there's usually, this is probably going to sound so bad, but there's usually a neighbor or someone that you know or like work with or something that is usually looking for some kind of extra income.
Exactly.
And they people all the time would offer to wash my clothes. And I was like, well,
I wondered about that.
You guys know what you're doing. So sure.
I wondered about that.
So,
I spent a few, almost 2 months in Haiti before I went and worked for Invisible Children. And man, I jumped around quite a bit, but it's kind of the same thing there. You know, it'd be, we were staying in like it was a hotel, I guess. It was more just like a compound, that had multiple rooms and whatnot. But you just kind of put your laundry, I had my day-to-day things that I would wash by hand and hey, I'm going to grab a shower and I'm going to wash my clothes at the same time kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But some of the other bigger things are the more like quote soiled clothes, that are a little more dirty.
Yeah.
Like hand those off, put them in a bag and somebody come around and collect them and then drop them off for you. And, they clearly know. I mean, hand washing is a skill. I've watched people do that.
I full on blistered both of my hands the first few times.
I can only imagine.
It was so bad.
And if you want color in your clothing, you shouldn't have them hand wash it.
Oh yeah, I learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way. I still have I have a bunch of clothes that are like tie-dye now.
Yeah.
I wash them together. I was like, what was I thinking?
Tie-dye / just like the color bleeds out. Whatever is used, it's like I don't know if it's the lye. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know exactly what's used.
I learned my lesson.
Yeah. I have several shirts. I still have them. Most of my shirts and most of my clothes that I took when I went to Haiti, but they're all quite faded. Came back quite faded. So.
Yeah, most of my clothes too, but
part of it, right?
Yeah, part of the experience. But so we had for our training. I mean, it was very extensive. Went into a lot of detail and on a lot of different things. And then we were at the training center all together for I think the first 3 weeks, and then
was your training center in like the area that you were, or was that in Kampala?
No, so the training center where we were all together the first 3 weeks was in Mukono. So so just about an hour or two from Kampala.
Gotcha.
And then we were split into our language groups. So depending which region you were going to, they would have us train in that language. So I was very adamant with the people who place us in our different regions that I really wanted to be in the north. I wanted to be as close to Gulu as possible because of Invisible Children and, a little biased, but I just loved it and wanted to be near there.
Yeah.
So they weren't sending volunteers from our cohort to Gulu, but they were sending them to Lira, which is a couple hours from Gulu. Yep. And so they luckily put me up there. So I was in the Longo group. And so we went up to our various regions and we spent 5 weeks with a host family in language training. And language training was also all day, every day. We had 5 weeks to learn as much of the language as we could, and then had to take a language proficiency interview.
Okay.
And you had to get intermediate low in order to pass it.
Yeah.
Then we lived with a host family and
That's
had
insane.
the full
That's crazy.
immersion experience. Yeah.
What if you didn't pass? What happens?
If you don't pass, you get a chance to retake it at at IST, which is in-service training, which
Okay.
is, I believe IST was 3 months after we swear in. So 3 months after all of our training ends.
Sure.
So you would have a chance to get a language tutor and have more time to learn and study and then retake it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, I mean, how did that go for you? How was that test? How did you feel about the language after those 5 weeks?
It was nerve-wracking. It was much more laid back. It was much more laid back than it sounds. It was just like a one-on-one conversation with one of your language teachers. But it was still, even though we knew if we failed, we could take it again in a few months, it was still this feeling of like, oh God, I have to pass or I'm getting sent home,
Sure.
And that wasn't the case, but it was just felt that way.
Yeah.
And both of my language teachers were incredible. We all just adored them. And so,
Nice.
I walked in and my teacher made it very laid back, and like I kept telling him how nervous I was, and he was like, "Don't be nervous. You're fine. You're fine. Like, I know how you do in class. You're gonna pass. You'll be fine." So yeah, I know that I butchered a few things,
Sure.
but I got intermediate high on mine, so I passed, which was good.
Great.
And then I didn't really end up using my language much because I was placed in Lira town, so a lot of people are placed in rural villages, and deeper in the village you will find that you need to use your language more. But being in a town, I just almost everyone I encountered spoke English and spoke it very well, and so they would speak to me in English, and so I would just thank somebody or greet somebody in the local language, and they would freak out and be like, our language.
Yeah. What is
yeah, a little bit.
What is like thank you in your local
So it's
language?
actually, the greeting and thank you is actually the same. It's apoyo.
Okay.
And so you can either say apoyo, just like passing people, saying hi, whatever.
Yeah.
Or you can say it as
Sure.
It also means thank you. And yeah, I would just say, apoyo or apoyo matek, which is thank you very much.
Yeah.
And they would go, oh, our language. And I would say, titadi, which is like a small amount.
Yeah.
And then they would just freak out. They're like, oh, you're fluent. I'm really not, but thank you. So yeah, I mean, that aspect was nice. Like I kind of lost my language training, at least the extent that I did know it at first. But it was still nice to, people were excited just from anything that I said. They were just excited that somebody had taken any kind of effort to learn any of it,
Had you, and maybe, Janie, what year did you work at Invisible Children?
So I never actually worked for Invisible Children. I was just a volunteer with them.
Okay.
Yeah, but I started my involvement with them, I believe it was 2006.
Okay.
And then, all the way up until now, technically.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't remember specifically. My last year was 2012. So fall 2012 was my last kind of semester at Invisible Children. And I was trying to think, I was like, man, I just don't, I didn't know a lot of the roadies. Like that year, specifically that fall, but mostly that year in general because it was just crazy town. And I was like looking through your pictures, and you got pictures with like tons of people that I know. And I was like, I just don't quite I can't quite place like which team she was on or like where she was at. I know. Yeah. I couldn't quite remember like exactly where you were. So it's funny that
I did start to apply to be a roadie right after high school, which I graduated high school in May of 2011.
Okay.
So it would have been fall of
2012.
Yeah, that would have been the 2012 group. But yeah, I started to apply, and then I just I realized that if I put off college, I probably wouldn't end up going.
Yeah.
Just because I had always been just so desperate to get out of school. I couldn't wait to just get out and be on my own and just not be in school anymore. So I was like, if I put off college, I know myself well enough to know I won't it'll be really hard to find the motivation to go back to school.
I get that.
Especially
I was the same
after,
way. I contemplated leaving my junior year before my senior year of college and kind of doing the same thing. And I was kind of the same way. I'm like, I should just finish. I got one more year. Just get it done, you know? And then I kind of like, me personally, I had just kind of like, all right, I've graduated. Like, I'm not going to go to Visible Children anymore. Yeah. And then, ta-da, I ended up doing it anyway. And then there you were. But, yeah. So, 2000, that was 2000. So, I started fall 2010. Okay. So, yeah.
Had a good little run.
A good little run. Couple tours as a roadie and worked in the office for a year and a half. So yeah, it was fun. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, cool. That's funny because I totally teed you up for like comparison to Invisible Children training because I totally thought that you worked at Invisible Children for a bit.
I'm honored.
Yeah, I remember you, but like I don't quite remember. There's just so much. Like that last year was just a big blur for me.
Yeah, especially 2012. That was it was a very crazy time at Invisible Children.
Yeah, and so I worked in our shipping and fleet coordinator. So we moved offices that last year, and I worked out of our warehouse. So I was completely like kind of segregated from the rest of the group. On top of the fact that I did a lot of trainings with our roadies, but I just didn't remember. I couldn't remember everybody. And so I was like, man, I totally like, I was going to come clean right out of the gates. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't quite remember what team you were on, but we got there. We got there, Janie.
No, it is all good. I'm flattered that you thought so.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's been a few years since,
a few years and a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of Invisible Children supporters. So
totally.
Yeah.
Cool. So now you're in Lyra.
Yes. So after language training for 5 weeks, we had 1 week of technical training where we went to stay with current volunteers. Okay. And they kind of just showed us around their site and showed us around their organization. And we all had to do practice facilitations. So
what does that mean?
So a majority of... Well, I'll backtrack a little bit. I admittedly, as I said, did not know much about Peace Corps prior to joining. And even once I was, packing up my house and getting ready to literally move to Uganda, I still didn't really know what I would be doing. Sure. I kind of just thought that Peace Corps sends you somewhere and you work as a Peace Corps kind of, volunteer, but kind of like a Peace Corps employee in that region. Yeah. But that is not how it works. Every volunteer is paired with an organization, with a local organization, and you just kind of work there to work on capacity building for the organization, helping them kind of continue the work that they do, but do it as effectively as possible. And you're primarily doing... Depending on your area of expertise and what your organization needs, you're doing a lot of like facilitations, going out in the field and just doing teachings on whatever it is that your sector is. So for like the agribusiness people, they would go and they would teach groups and communities how to make sack gardens. So if you don't have a lot of land, but you still, need to either need food for yourself, or it could be an IGA, an income generating activity, where you can grow your own things and sell them. So they would teach things like that, and they would go to local VSLAs, which is Village Savings and Loan Associations, which is kind of, instead of people going to a bank, it's just like a local group in the community that does their own saving. Yeah, it's one of my favorite programs that we did at Invisible Children, actually. Oh wow, I didn't know Invisible Children did that. Yeah, and it's easily you just need the group of people. And so that was one of our programs as well, the VSLA. Definitely my favorite. That was always my go-to, and people would ask like, what's your favorite program? It was the VSLA. I loved it. I loved everything about it. I actually have like the packet
of like information. It's a large packet of information.
Yeah.
That's just like all about how to start one and how to create it and how to do it.
That's
and,
awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really amazing. And so for listeners listening, it's a program that, like you said, it's very similar to a bank, but it's like small. And so it's like small loans. So maybe you need, money to buy a goat or to buy seeds for your bag garden that you were talking about. And then so you use that, and then there's a payment process, each month, or each whatever the set time frame is. And, you're constantly, that group of people. And I want to say it works best between like 10 and 12 people. Is that right?
All right.
Yeah, like 10 to 20. I mean, I think that there's like an ideal number of people. It's been a while since I've reviewed that information, but it's really interesting, and there's a lot of accountability and what's the word? Just integrity, I guess, within it, because it's your friends, it's your people that you like run around with. It's a lot of times the people that you're in this group with, and so you don't want to come to that meeting, whenever that meeting is once a month, and not have your payment that month. So it's built-in kind of integrity and checks and balances, and it's a really cool program. It's beautiful, and it allows people to expand their businesses and do some really cool stuff. I've thought about like how cool would it be to do something like that, like locally, like even within my own friends group. Haven't ever done it, but I've thought about it.
Well, maybe this will reinvigorate that idea.
Maybe I'll let you know.
Yeah. So, again, just depending on what your organization needs, you kind of come in to fill that role. But as I've said, I'm by no means a medical professional, or have medical training. And I think a common misconception particularly with Peace Corps, is that if you look on paper, that people that they send there don't seem qualified. And I honestly struggled with that myself for a while. I was like, I've never studied anything in depth about health. I'm not in the medical field. Like what gives me the right to come over and be a community health educator? But the difference is, the misconception is that we go there to actually provide health services, which we don't. We are not allowed to assist in any way with health or with injuries or anything like that. Our role is specifically education. So while I may not have, medical training or anything like that, so much of the education that's needed, especially in the rural communities, is very basic medical knowledge for us. So a perfect example is I was at a training just a few weeks ago for a program called DREAMS, which stands for Determined, Resilient, Empowered, AIDS-Free, Mentored, and Safe. And it's basically like a girls' support group that you can form in your community. And we did a practice activity where we pretended that we were facilitating to a group of DREAMS girls, and each group was given a different symptom of poor hygiene, and each group then had a few minutes to get together and plan something, a way to teach the girls a way that they can help with that. So my group had, I think it was decaying teeth, or it was something to do with your teeth. So we were just going to demonstrate brushing your teeth, and my counterpart got up and was practicing the facilitation, and he goes, okay, so you take the toothbrush, you go up and down, and you go like this, and then you scrub the roof of your mouth and your tongue and whatever. And afterwards, and we were kind of sitting there thinking this whole thing was silly, because we were like, okay, so we're gonna get up there and talk about brushing your teeth, like, okay.
Something we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, and so even doing this activity and having lived there at this point for 9 months or so, I was still thinking that this was kind of a silly activity. And then after my counterpart presented, the person who was leading our session told us, that we need to be much more specific. We need to specify that they're brushing up and down with a toothbrush, because I don't think he specified that when he said it originally. And so she said, if you just go up there and say, just brush up and down, they're going to be like, brush with what? Like, brush with a stick, with a leaf? Like, what am I brushing with, So you have to specify a toothbrush, and then also specify that you put toothpaste on the toothbrush. And a lot of people can't afford toothpaste or don't have easy access to it. And so she was telling us some alternatives that they can use for toothpaste. And one of the big one I remember was ash, which is surprising to me, but I knew that was something that they used as an alternative for soap, but apparently it can be an alternative for toothpaste as well. And that was something I didn't know. And, it's just things that we take for granted, that we don't think about, that I've known how to brush my teeth since I was 2 years old, something like that, And so a lot of the job is just education, really. And it's not education that needs to be, you don't need to be a doctor in order to do it. You just have to have the base knowledge, and then you get the training in more specific areas. Like, I only had a very limited knowledge on HIV before going, and we got trained specifically in HIV and malaria and issues that were going to come up that we were going to be working with. So it was a lot, but I think that's a common misconception. Is the qualifications of people, and just sending over, white savior complex people who want to go change the world but aren't really qualified to do so. So that was something I struggled with a lot. But
now, looking back, now that you've been there for almost a year, you had been there for almost a year. What's your take on things now? Now that you've kind of experienced what that's like, that process, and maybe some of the misconceptions that you even came into the Peace Corps with.
Yeah, I think Peace Corps definitely has its flaws. Don't get me wrong.
Sure. We all
generally
do, right?
Speaking,
let's be honest.
Everything does. And I think
we've seen the flaws of the world. They've been very in our face in the last month. So we all, if you don't know, I mean, come on. We've got to treat each other with grace, and treat companies and treat people and treat things. We have to hold people accountable as well. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I want to not to get on my soapbox, but absolutely, there isn't a perfect person, there isn't a perfect thing out there. So
and I think I think that the intention of Peace Corps is good, and I don't think anything poorly of that, and I don't even really think poorly of Peace Corps. It's just that logistically they are sending 7,000 plus volunteers to all different regions of the world. And there's a lot of coordination that has to happen. There's a lot of logistics. And even with all of the staff that's involved, things fall through the cracks. Things are overlooked. And a lot of times, I can only speak from the Uganda perspective, but they will hire local staff to work for Peace Corps as well, in our training and in our administration on the Ugandan end and things like that. And I think that's great, because it provides job opportunities for local people, which is ultimately one of our biggest goals. But it also can make things get lost in translation sometimes. And our Ugandan staff was incredible. I adore every single one of them. But it just logistically could make things difficult sometimes. And it was also difficult being, again, I can only speak to Uganda specifically, but we had a lot of rules that came from headquarters in Washington, D.C. And they just weren't realistic rules for us to follow. But we had to, the biggest example is in Uganda, the main mode of public transportation is bodas, which are kind of in between a motorcycle and a moped. They're not as scary and intimidating as a motorcycle, but they're more efficient than a moped, if that makes sense.
Totally get it. Yep.
But so that's just how everyone gets around. You just hop on the back of this bike and they take you, and that's just how everyone gets around.
It's cheap and easy.
And volunteers are not allowed to ride bodas. And if you are caught riding a boda, you are sent home, no questions asked.
Really?
Yeah, no questions asked whatsoever. They will send you home. Doesn't matter if you were stuck somewhere at night and needed to get home safely. Doesn't matter what it was, you're sent home.
Wow.
And yeah, and like no explanations, no second chances, you're just sent home. And that was a big one that was a real issue for a lot of us because it just didn't make sense. And it came from Washington, from people who had not, a lot of people who work at headquarters have served in the Peace Corps in various parts of the world, but there are still those that haven't served or haven't served. Even if you have served, you can't know what the conditions of different countries are unless you did a million different Peace Corps tours and, went to a bunch of different countries. So it was frustrating that like our local staff wouldn't be allowed to make that decision.
Do you think it's, I mean, as much that as it is just the liability of you being on?
Oh, it's absolutely a liability. And that's
but it's
what
still
was
not
frustrating.
Realistic.
Yeah, that's what was frustrating was because, whoever is looking at this in DC, they're looking at it from a legal perspective, from a liability perspective. And I appreciate my safety being considered, but at the end of the day, we're all adults and should be able to make our own decisions regarding that. And, I always said, I was like, if it's really a liability thing, just have me sign a waiver that says if I get hurt on a boda, it's my fault and I'll pay for it and, whatever. But like, this is just insane that I can't ride a boda. And, so it was really frustrating from that perspective because, like I said, we're adults. And I mean, I understand that they have had volunteers injured, potentially even died from boda accidents. And I understand there's a reason that rule is in place, but I equate it to if you sent someone to America and didn't let them ride in a car because there are
it's like
so
you can
many
only
fatal
take
car
taxi.
accidents.
You can't take an Uber.
Yeah, like there are so many fatal car accidents every single day, and cars are still just how everyone gets around. And like, you run that risk driving a car here in America, whereas in Uganda, bodas are how everyone gets around.
Right.
And so it just was like crazy to me that would be something we weren't even given the choice to do, like a waiver or something. So that was frustrating.
I could see that. That was kind of the similar, setup in Haiti was very similar. For me, I rode on the back of many of those. What you're calling a boda, it's a moped, basically, of sorts. A little bit. I mean, if you want to paint a picture, just think about your like little mopeds or your little scooters. In the United States, they're similar to that.
Yes. So it was a lot, but I mean, I understand where it came from, and it's just that certain things like that I wish that the local Peace Corps offices in the different regions had a little more say, I guess.
Yeah, it wasn't a blanket rule, but more regional.
And just in things like that. And so my general point was just, I think the intention of Peace Corps is good. I think that the intention of anyone who joins Peace Corps is good. You're not, even if you do have a bit of white savior complex, which undoubtedly many volunteers do, even if they aren't aware of it. I'm sure that I was guilty of it sometimes. It's just, it just kind of comes with the territory. Unfortunately, you just have to be as aware of it as you can be, and try to mitigate it as much as you can. But
how do you feel about some of that? I mean, I'm not going to lie, I struggle with it a lot.
I do.
Because
I do too.
It's the same concept, and I know we're getting into maybe some deep water here, but it's the same concept of like just privilege in general, and I struggle with how it's you kind of mentioned it, it's intentions, and looking at people's intentions first. People don't. I'm assuming that most people that go into the Peace Corps have great intentions, right? And yes, some of those might be like, I've got the answers and I can do that, especially in what it sounds like a more educational role with the Peace Corps. But man, it's still hard to kind of wrap your brain around and like and almost look at yourself. Working at Invisible Children, we had these discussions a lot, and we had these, this idea, and we were accused of, and Jason was accused. There's so many of these different conversations, so it's no stranger to this conversation, I guess. But the idea of the Western world, the white person going and saving, these less fortunate, and having all the answers and knowing everything and whatnot. But it's easy to point the finger, but it's hard to actually wrap your brain around in some ways, especially when you're in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so that's something that I struggled with a lot while I was over there, and I still struggle with. And one of the trickiest things being over there was that you had so much time particularly to self-reflect. And so that was something that just took over my mind for a very long time. And I had many conversations with like my mom and with my fellow volunteers about it. And it's something that's so complex that I think you really have to choose how you feel about it to an extent.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way. That's a good.
Like, I don't think that there is any one blanket. Like, I don't think it's a black and white area of either you have white savior complex or you don't. I think that first off, it will depend very much on each person. But I think that in order to avoid white savior complex, I think being self-aware is the number one thing. And just checking in with yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. And I think that intentions do matter, but you also have to be realistic. So Preach. I've always been called very idealistic and, head in the clouds and that kind of person. And I've always wanted to make a difference to anybody. And so when I first went, I was, kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, I'm going to go do some good, and then the longer I was there, the more I realized that, I knew that I was not, like, myself was not going to change the world or change even this community that I was in.
Sure.
But it was my job to understand the people that I was working with as best I could and just use whatever skills and knowledge that I was fortunate enough to have in order to help them help themselves and help their families. And there are so many issues to tackle in places like Uganda and all the places that Peace Corps sends people. And I think something that I don't know if this is true or not, but from my perspective, everything that needs to be addressed is so systematically in place and so ingrained. And a lot of it is cultural. Like, it's really easy to see certain practices that are negatively impacting a community and be able to come in and pinpoint that from the Western world and be like, that's a crazy practice. Why are you doing that? Or like, why do you believe that? It's making you sick, or it's doing this, But I think that one thing that Peace Corps really does well is training you in those cultural aspects of, this is something people do. This is why they believe it. And here is like a sensitive way to go about it. So you're coming in with empathy. You're not coming in as like this preacher that's going to save the day.
Right.
You're
pushing
just coming
your
in
agenda.
Yeah, exactly. And so a really common myth is that going in the rain makes you get malaria. So like if you're walking around in the rain, you'll get malaria. And that's something that we know for sure to not be true.
Right.
And so it's just little things like that. And There's actually there's an Instagram page called No White Saviors that's actually based in Uganda, and they rip into Peace Corps all the time.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that a lot because a lot of people I really truly respect, particularly from Invisible Children, have told me about this page and tell me to follow it. But I feel like it's one extreme end of the spectrum. And I feel like it kind of makes everything seem black and white, and it's not. I think that intentions matter, but you have to be self-aware. Like, we're not supposed to post pictures of anyone without their consent. And a lot of people don't follow that. You know, a lot of people post pictures of the kids that they work with without getting parental consent. And it's things that don't seem like they would matter, but that you need to consider.
Yeah. And it's creating a new system. It's creating a new expectation, a new standard.
Exactly.
In a situation that, I mean, we don't do that in the United States. I mean, think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's how many pages, how many hashtags, how many, things out there that are dedicated just to photobombing, and like, it's not, I don't know. There's just different things. As you're talking, I was trying to kind of come up with an analogy, something that would be comparable to like, the white savior complex of like in the West in some ways. And I think the like stay at home order, this like social distancing idea is almost one of those things that like we can't quite wrap our heads around, at least in the States. And I think that's globally, in a lot of places, but it's trying to change something that's built in within you. That's really hard. And I think that that's some of again, it's going back to like pushing your agenda, or having, there's best practices for things, right?
Yeah,
but it's also
absolutely.
Understanding the cultural significance or the cultural aspects of all of those different things. And it isn't a black and white issue. It's a multiple shades of gray issue.
Right.
And I've said it on this podcast once. I've said it probably 100 times. Not true, because we've only had like 95 podcasts, but I've said it a lot, that the extremes are necessary because they allow us to have conversations like we're having right now, Janie. But at the same time, the action and the real progress happens in the middle. And it's when both the extreme sides, when you can find the people in the middle to move that pendulum one direction or the other on those different things. And I think it's similar. It sounds like from what you're saying, that's a pretty honest response. It's the extremes and understanding, knowing, and being cognizant and aware of your privilege wherever you are in the world is important. But we also have to not, I don't know. This is something that I'm big with, just with CrazyFaceUno in general, is empowering, loving, and celebrating. And I think that we do a lot of like tearing down in our world versus like celebrating the things that we do well and celebrating the things that are good. And so, I think that it's important to empower, the local people that you're working with. It's important to love them. It's important to celebrate the things that they're doing well. And it's also important for us as somebody that's coming into another culture, whether you're in the United States, there's cultures within the States,
Oh yeah, for sure.
Or you're going to, a developing country or a country like Uganda, whether you're in the rural area or you're in the city, you have to come with grace and understanding and not just like that you have all the answers. And I think that's the difference. It's not coming and saying like, hey, I have all the answers. What do you want? I can fix that. It's understanding it. It's digging in. It's getting dirty and figuring out what are the reasons. Oh, going out in the rain. Well, maybe you do get sick. My mom always says you're going to catch a cold if you go outside in the rain. You don't have your head covered. You're going to catch a cold. And those aren't really true either necessarily.
It might make you more susceptible to it, but it's not
exactly.
You go in the rain, you're going to get sick. It's just increases your chances.
Malaria is also one of those things that in some of these countries that have malaria pretty prevalent, that is pointed to when anybody gets sick in general. though, as well.
Oh yeah. I would get a cold every now and then, and I would tell my coworkers or my neighbors like that I just had a cold, and they did not understand what I was talking about.
It's malaria.
Like it's either flu or malaria.
Yeah.
And yeah, but as far as the savior complex goes, I mean, that's why I say I really think that I think you just kind of have to choose how you look at it, because there is so much gray area, and at the end of the day, you can only interpret it for yourself. You can only figure out if you fall into one extreme or the other. And so I think that just self-reflection and just thinking about why you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, and even if there is personal motive behind it, like, you know, even if there is, I want to feel good about myself. I mean, you know, that might not be the greatest reason to help people, but if you're still helping people and you're still aware that you don't know everything and you can't fix everything, you just want to do whatever you're able to do to help people, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that there are some people who, as we said, with nothing is perfect, NGOs and not developing countries, places like aid workers who come to help developing countries.
Yeah.
There's going to be flaws. There's going to be people who abuse that. There's going to be all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you know, I don't think that countries should stop helping other countries. I think that you have to, if you're going to go in and help someplace that's foreign to you, you have to go in, you have to do your research. You have to understand where you're going into. You have to understand the people that you're going to be working with. And I think that I don't think Peace Corps gets enough credit in that aspect, because we do have, you know, several months of training before we go into actual service.
Yeah.
And then our first 3 months after training, when we are at our site, we're not supposed to like start any projects. We're just really supposed to be observing and integrating and getting to know our communities. And you know, that all plays a very big role, as opposed to just an aid worker that comes in for X amount of weeks or months at a time and does a job and gets out. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Those can also be very helpful roles. But in terms of, you know, people blaming Peace Corps or accusing it of having this savior complex, I think that's a really harsh blanket statement to make.
I agree. It's an easy cop out. It's an easy cop out. You can point at something.
I'll give an example of what I viewed as the savior complex, and I don't know this person, so I could be wrong. Her intentions may have been great, but there was a girl whose boyfriend was serving in Peace Corps, and she decided to move to Uganda to be with him, and just posted about how she was moving to Uganda and she was going to find a teaching job once she got there and help people. And while I'm sure her intentions were good, and again, I don't know her, I'm not meaning to pass judgment or anything, but things like that are kind of like where you can think that just because you're American, you can come into a place and be some kind of help off the bat with no training and no avenue that you're just going to show up at a school and say, hey, I'm American, I can teach, you know, it's just, I think that there are ways to do things that are more sensitive and are more sensitive and less savior complex.
Well, let's use this example that you kind of brought to our attention or brought up. What would be the appropriate way to go about that if you were her?
So I would say, I mean, it's tricky in that position because I don't know her motives 100%
this
for
is
moving,
just your
if it was
opinion,
just for the boyfriend or whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think depending on your circumstances, applying for something like Peace Corps, whether that's Peace Corps specifically or another organization that sends volunteers abroad, or if there's a specific place in the world that you want to move to, that maybe you've seen a documentary on a place that really just tugged at your heartstrings and you want to go help on the ground, do your research on that place and find local organizations that are working in the field that you feel you could help with in some capacity, and reach out to those organizations, see if they need a volunteer, see if they need an intern. And, Peace Corps is a great option because they will provide you with healthcare and with a stipend
Right.
and a readjustment allowance that will accrue until you end your service, so that you have some money when you come home. And it gives you a really relatively smooth avenue to do that. Whereas, if you just emailed or called or got in contact somehow with a local organization, they very well may not be able to pay you. So you do run that risk, and
Right.
There's all kinds of flaws that could happen with that kind of plan. But I think that doing research and making contacts and kind of finding a way to do it realistically and responsibly, I think is the best way to go about it.
Sure. I get that. What, so let's shift gears a little bit here, Janie. And as we've kind of talked about your intro into the Peace Corps, I'd love to hear, maybe over the last, almost a year, over this time, what are some of the things that you're excited about, or that you were kind of proud that you were able to be a part of, and to work alongside some of the people there, or whatever that might be? What are some of the things you're proud of with your time with the Peace Corps?
So I would say I am most proud of the work I was able to do with menstrual hygiene management.
Cool.
I was able to go to a couple primary schools with my counterpart and 1 or 2 fellow volunteers, depending which school we went to. And we were able to reach over 500 girls, teach them about menstrual hygiene. And it was actually, it was very humbling for me, because I think this was one of those times I kind of unconsciously went in with the savior complex in mind. Yeah. And so many of these girls already knew, like, for example, we started out with the anatomy of the uterus, and so many of them could already label the different parts of the uterus. And, they knew the biological aspect. And so fortunately that wasn't our whole lesson plan. So they didn't know everything that we were going to talk about, but I was really impressed, and I was really, it made me look at myself and go, like, their children are in school here, and they're it's easy, even though from a logical perspective that kids around the world are in school, you don't know what they're learning. And especially in a place like Uganda, my thought process was that women, are without a doubt the inferior sex. And so my thought process was just that these girls might not have gotten that kind of teaching because it might not have seemed important. And so I was very impressed, and I was very humbled by that fact that they did know the biological and anatomical aspects of that. But my favorite part, and what I'm most proud of, was that I decided to add into our lesson plan the symptoms that often go with menstruation. And so we went over the anatomy, we went over the 28-day cycle, and went over truths and myths, because there were a lot of myths surrounding periods and women's bodies. And all of that was really interesting, and a lot of the girls were interactive with it. But the symptoms was something I really just personally wanted to go over, because I personally get really bad PMS. And it's very hard to explain to anybody. There are even girls I know who don't get PMS and have said that girls who say they're PMSing are just using it as an excuse to be a bitch. And I'm like, I promise you that's not true, as somebody who deals with it, And, for me, my emotions I can be totally elated and happy and having a great time, and I'll drop a pen and be really angry, it's just the drop of a hat. My emotions change so quickly and so overwhelmingly. And I've gotten to a point where I know how to control it to an extent, but it still happens. And so I wanted to explain to these girls that everything that they're feeling is normal, because
Sure.
there's not just PMS, there's headaches, there's cramps, there's backaches, there's bloating, there's fatigue, there's all kinds of things.
And everybody's body's different, and everybody responds differently.
Exactly. And that's something that I really wanted to drive home with these girls, was that, you may get all of these symptoms, you may get none of these symptoms,
right.
but I promise you they're all real. And if you experience any of them, it's completely normal. And just letting them know they might be really tired. They might find it hard to pay attention. They might find themselves boiling with rage. They might find themselves crying for no reason. Like these are all, and they might get a sharp pain in their stomach or their back or whatever. And that was something that many of the girls that I spoke to said that they hadn't known about, and that they were grateful to learn that everyone's body is different, and that, they may get a period different from their friend.
Sure.
They may get different symptoms. They may get, one girl might barely bleed. One girl might bleed a river. It's everyone's very different. And so that was something that they hadn't really been exposed to. So I think that it's a really weirdly specific thing to be proud of, but I think I'm most proud of my decision to include symptoms in the lesson plan, because it was something that they didn't know before, and something that I don't think anyone was really going to tell them.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but menstrual hygiene has been a push, specifically in Uganda, for several years now. It's kind of like education has. Of.
Yes. Well, a big issue is a lack of accessibility to resources for your period. So tampons are not really, they exist, but they're not really used. They're very rare.
Probably expensive.
Yeah, they're expensive. And then they do sell pads like they would in a store here. But those are also expensive. Sure. And for most families, that's not a priority to spend whatever their budget is on that. And so a big thing in Uganda, and I'm sure in other countries, but again, I can only speak to Uganda, is RUMPS, which is reusable menstrual pads. Okay. And so there are a lot of NGOs now that make and or distribute reusable menstrual pads.
That's cool.
And they actually trained us on how to make those during our Peace Corp training. And I was supposed to go back to one of the schools where I did the facilitation and teach the girls to make their own rumps, but we got evacuated. So I didn't get a chance to do that. But it's a big issue, mainly because of the expense. And a lot of girls will stay home from school during their periods, so they miss 1 week out of every month of school, which is really detrimental to their education.
Absolutely.
And a lot of girls will use just whatever they have, and oftentimes they'll shred up some clothes and use pieces of fabric and things that are not necessarily hygienic, and that lead to infections. And there's all kinds of issues surrounding that. So I think that the basic education of you're not hemorrhaging, this is supposed to happen to your body, is important, so that they know that it's normal, and also knowing ways to handle it in a hygienic way. And actually a very, very common question that I got was asking about white discharge that women will get. And they were, because I was explaining to them the blood, but they were like, well, what about this white stuff, And that was something I hadn't thought before doing my lessons to talk about. But we would then go on to explain to them that that's just the vagina cleaning itself out, and it's totally normal, nothing to worry about. And it was just it was things that, when I was that age, I asked the same questions, but it's hard to remember when you're not that age what you didn't know at the time. So
it's cool that you can be that resource, even if you have the knowledge, you are informed, and it's one of those things that's really, it's cool for you to be that sounding board for people to be like, hey, and like you said, it's things you had questions about, it's things you asked questions about, but it's it's a normal thing. It's not something to like run away from or be afraid of or be
And I mean, I
scared
was admittedly nervous when I would go to do these facilitations. I was like, oh God, this is such an awkward topic. This is just going to be so uncomfortable, you know?
The giggles across the room, I'm sure.
Yeah, there were the giggles, but like they almost just fed the energy of it. Like it wasn't really awkward. It just made it more easy to make it fun because then like you could joke about it with them. Like obviously it is a serious thing that you're teaching them, but it doesn't have to be like a big scary you're gonna bleed every month, you know, whatever. It's something that just we all go through and everybody knows it's weird and it's awkward and like we're all in it together kind of. So it just kind of created more of a unity between us, and that was something that I found really beneficial to do in those facilitations was to relate it back to me and let them know I get this too, and this is how I deal with it, and this is what symptoms I get. And, you know, it just made them more comfortable with me, and it made me more relatable to them.
Vulnerability breeds vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brene Brown never lets you down.
Oh, I love her.
Oh, just keeping it going, man. Look at that. Janie, as we shift gears one more time, we are about 15 minutes from the end of our show here. We haven't talked about it much, but I would love to get into in these last 15 minutes. You know, you kind of touched on it. You got evacuated by the Peace Corp. Yes. That was, you know, you mentioned the number. There's over 7,000?
Over 7,000.
Over 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers that were evacuated around the world. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I know that you and a group of you that were potentially in the same region together had quite the process. Why don't you walk us through that? How did that all even come about? Like who reached out to you? What was this conversation? And even like as things started to develop, what's the conversation around, you know, COVID-19 before you left? You know, you guys were working kind of in that health area, I guess, you know, as far as your post, you know, with the Peace Corps, but what was that conversation, kind of what led to your eventual evacuation, and then what was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was definitely it was a lot, you know, and I think I can't remember exactly when Corona started making the news, but I know for months, you know, we would see it about the reports of it in China and different parts of Asia and Europe and things like that. But
since like December, right? I mean, I feel like that was when it really started to kind of hit the news cycle.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I'd be, you know, at this internet cafe I love, and they'd have the news on, and I would keep seeing Corona, and memes started popping up about the Corona beer and other beers hiding from it and stuff like that. And it was all just kind of distant at that time. And you know, even once it started popping up in more places around the world, in my mind, I was kind of relating it to like when the Zika virus was going around, and everyone was scared of it, but it was just so distant. Like I didn't really think about it, and not just because it couldn't affect me, just because I was like, well, you know, the chances of it are so slim. Like I'm not going to stress about it. Right. And Corona was like that in my mind for quite some time, and then we actually, just a couple months ago, we had a different problem coming in. We had locusts, and they were swarming. Huh? Yeah, and this was the first time that they were coming to Uganda, as far as I know, in like 20 years or something, is what I was told. It had been a long time, and so it wasn't even just the locusts themselves that we were concerned about, but they... You know, the issue with the locusts is that they will eat people's crops. Right. And so people, A, don't have their livelihood to sell their crops anymore, and B, food prices significantly increase, and then you could very well be looking at a famine. And so we had that concern coming in, and on top of that, they were going to be spraying pesticides that are banned in a lot of places because of the harm they can do to humans, in order to get rid of the locusts. And so, you know, we were all kind of on the edge of our seats, like, are we going to get evacuated because of this locust thing, or are we going to be put in consolidation, which is kind of the in-between step when there's a safety issue, but they don't know how long it will be.
Interesting. Wow.
They gather us all at one place at a hotel or at a conference center or whatever it may be, someplace where we can stay for an indefinite amount of time. And so we were all kind of bracing for that. And then the locust talk kind of died down, and it didn't end up reaching my community. And, you know, we kind of just blew past it. And then we started hearing about different Peace Corps posts around the world being evacuated due to Corona. And it was mostly in places that we knew that there were cases, and it was just spreading really fast.
Yeah.
And so there hadn't been any cases in Uganda. And so we thought it might be a possibility, but we weren't really thinking it was actually going to happen. Then I remember very vividly, it was the weekend before St. Patrick's Day, and my friends and I had a good handful of volunteers who lived close enough to me that we would get together regularly. And we met up at one of our favorite places, and we decided to celebrate St. Patrick's Day the Saturday before. And we had increasingly heard about more and more posts closing and being evacuated. And Peace Corps, the rumor mill and the gossip mill in Peace Corps spreads like a wildfire. And so even if it's from different countries. And so, you know, there were countries that were getting this email that seemed like it was a blanket Peace Corps email for all posts. And we hadn't received it yet, but it was basically saying that volunteers would have, from every region, would have the option to take interrupted service, which is basically when your service ends due to something out of your control.
Sure.
So if you have a safety and security issue or something like that, that's, you know, you're not choosing to leave your post, but you have to for some other reason. So you still get certain benefits. You still get certain status when you get back without having the, I guess, like tainted, I chose to leave kind of thing.
Right. It's like honorable discharge, but. Yeah,
exactly. So we were hearing this rumor that we would get this email. And so Saturday we all get to the place, and everything is just very somber. Like, we were supposed to be there celebrating St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And we were all just, you know, quiet and couldn't figure out what was going on. And while we were there, we got the email that we could take interrupted service. And so they told us that the following week they would be checking in with each individual to see what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And naturally we all had a million questions, and we're bombarding the poor staff.
Yeah.
They only had so many answers because they weren't at headquarters.
Yeah.
And so one of the big questions was, well, what is the likelihood that we will get evacuated, that we'll have to leave regardless of what we choose?
Sure.
And we kept being told that evacuation wasn't even on the table. And, and I understand that it's very possible that was true to them at the time.
Yeah.
Everything just happened so fast.
Yeah.
But
clearly wasn't true in the long run.
Yeah.
Janie,
so,
do you mind?
People...
Sorry to cut you off.
No.
Are you? What's your time frame? Do you have time after? I'm just watching the time, and I see that we haven't even gotten into the coronavirus. I cut it off at an hour and a half. So everybody listening, it's totally cool. But I would love to keep going. So would you be willing to?
I've got time.
Cool. I'm going to stop it. So I'm going to close this out here, and then we'll do a second part to this conversation if you've got the time.
I'm a chatterbox. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm right there with you, and I'm fascinated by this conversation. I've been so excited all weekend to have this conversation. I've been telling my family and whatever. So I'm really
honored.
Yeah, no, I'm honored to have you on as well. I think it's really cool. I've always, very much, like I said, I was very much interested in the Peace Corps. Still very much am.
Yeah.
It doesn't really fit into my life and where I'm at right now, and
right.
Such is life, I guess. But no, I'm very fascinated, and I love all the conversation, all the conversation that we're having, and so I would love to continue that if you've got the free time. So
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. I'm gonna close this out, and then we'll do round 2 with you.
All right, sounds good.
Cool. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm having trouble here. Hey, there we go. Amateur hour here on Crazy Face Uno. Thank you all so much for listening. Your contributions help us tell more stories like Janie's and stories just like yours. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Check us out, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the above. Check us out on your social media. Share The Crazy Face Uno with your friends and family, or just random strangers on the street. We're welcome for everyone. And again, check out World Central Kitchen. Chef Jose Andres doing some amazing work over there. Check them out. And tune in to part 2 of Janie Lunn and the Peace Corp / COVID-19. Thank you all. We love you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Peace!